Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Friday Digest series. We're very thrilled to have you join us today. My name is Jason All, Director of Strategic Communications here at Maryland LCV, and I'm very excited to be hosting my very first Friday Digest. Though many of you may already be familiar with me, I usually hang out in the chat box answering questions during most of our Friday Digest, but very happy to be on screen with you today. And I'm also very pleased to be joined by our Deputy Executive Director, Ramon, and our Director of Climate Policy and Justice, Rebecca. If you have joined us before, you know our goal with these Friday Digests is to provide you with information and tools and resources to be an informed and active advocate. Being with us for our Friday Digest really speaks to the power of our community and to your commitment to the solutions that will create a healthy environment for everybody in Maryland. We always want the agenda for these live virtual meetings to be driven by your interest and needs, so please let us know what you want to hear for our future Friday Digest, which is easily done by the survey we'll be sending out at the end of this meeting. And also, as you join, please type in your name and where you're coming from. As we move through the half hour today, also please enter any questions and comments you have in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to them by the end. But before we dive into today's session, I do want to set the stage for what we'll be covering. House Bill 24 and House Bill 96 focuses on the Maryland Department of the Environment, or MDE's Permitting Authority. The bill itself represents one step towards integrating environmental justice into Maryland's environmental policymaking. At a very high level, the bill looks to embed environmental justice within the permitting process. This isn't just adding another layer of bureaucracy, but it's really giving MDE the authority to make decisions viewed through the lens of equity, particularly when it comes to permits that may affect our most overburdened and underserved communities. Maryland LCV is also advocating for an amendment to this bill to follow the lead of community leaders in these neighborhoods and better address the air quality concerns most directly impacting public health. But this bill is ultimately about laying the groundwork for a Maryland where environmental justice isn't an afterthought, but an actual foundational principle in our decision making. And with that, I'd love to kick things off with a question for Rebecca. Rebecca, well, I think we all fundamentally understand what a permit is at a base level. Could you briefly explain what these MDE permits are, why MDE issues them, and its role in the environmental protection process?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason, and welcome to the host chair. Excited to see you in front of the camera today. And thanks to everybody for joining. I do also, I know, happy Friday, happy March. Time is flying here in Annapolis, and I really appreciate everybody's time tuning in today. And especially I know for those who tune in every Friday, you're paying close attention to what's going on here in Annapolis. And I do just want to give a big thanks to the law enforcement officers here in Annapolis who kept us all safe yesterday afternoon as the Capitol building went on lockdown after a call in with a threat. So just appreciate everyone who checked in with Maryland LCV staff to make sure that we were okay. Our office is only a few blocks from the Capitol, and several of us were here when activities started. So I just want to thank our entire network for being so supportive of our work and our safety during this busy time of year for us. So just a huge thanks to everyone who responded to that call in, and just want to make sure you all knew that how much we appreciate you as you checked in with us. So to answer your question, Jason, I really appreciate the question because this bill, as with many others, can get in the weeds very quickly. So this is a bill talking about permitting. So what are permits? So the Maryland Department of the Environment, that's where we're going to focus our attention today. But of course, each state agency issues, or every state agency would issue permits in their jurisdiction. This can happen at the local level as well. There's also federal permits. But really, there are laws set by the legislature, right? The legislature will set laws, and that can happen again at the federal level or the state level on specific pollution limits. So we know that we have to be in compliance with federal and state laws about pollution, whether it's water pollution or air pollution, to make water safe to drink or safe to recreate, the different standards for different things. And also, the air is safe to breathe. And so that's why the laws are in place. And so the permits, that's the regulatory arm to make sure that the state stays in compliance with those laws. It's kind of like a permission slip, to a facility to say, okay, I'm going to come operate in the state of Maryland. I'm going to apply to start a business I know will emit water or air pollution. And so that means I need to apply for a permit because I'm going to be under I'm going to be given permission by the state to emit X amount, so that the state can stay under those laws that keep us safe.
So building off of that, what kind of things does MDE consider when writing these permits, or perhaps even more appropriately, what don't they consider?
Yeah, and I know there's MDE folks on the call. They introduce themselves, so got to be careful, got to be correct about this, and so I'll keep it broad, really. But what they do consider an applicant, so a company, will come in and submit for a permit, and in that MDE will look at, actually, they look a lot at that company. Do they have a good compliance record? Do they have other businesses operating in the state of Maryland or other states? And are they in compliance with those permits they may already hold? They may look at things like, if folks are familiar, there's a pollutant called ozone. It's a heavily regulated pollutant because it's so harmful to human health. That ground level ozone is harmful to human health and can come from a number of sources. That's why it's heavily regulated, and there are some areas in Maryland that are non-attainment areas, which just means they're not in compliance. They're over, a safe limit. And so if you're going into an area like that, you might have different laws, different limits for permits. There's also some permits that have public participation requirements, and so the department will take into consideration what they hear during the public comment portion of a permit. So those are the kinds of things that MDE will take into consideration when issuing a permit.
Rebecca, you mentioned human health, which I actually think is a great segue into environmental justice. With that, Ramon, I'd actually like to shift gears and talk about that a little bit. Could you define what environmental justice is, and more importantly, why it's important for Maryland's communities?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. It's also, I think, my first Friday Digest of the year. So it's great to be here with you all, and also the ones that are watching us on the Facebook Live. So yeah, first thing first, right? What is environmental justice? So I think environmental justice is is the reality that some communities are often subject to a disproportionate level of pollution and contaminants, right? And this can take many forms. It could be a community that is nested between factories, that trucks drive in and out every day, endangering health, public safety. It could be hosting other polluting facilities. It might not have access to public transportation. It might not have access to healthy foods. It might be a community that has under housing where kids go to school and they're mold on the ceiling. So there's a lot of manifestations of environmental injustices, but that is in a nutshell. So, but it is also how communities are fighting, right? How communities are fighting against perpetuating this system of disproportionate impacts of environmental injustices and harm and environmental harm. So, environmental justice, it's important because it embraces the principle that all people should have the same protections, the same access, and also the same enforcement. It kind of it's key to achieving justice, ensuring that people have their needs met, that people are protected, and that people are visible, are being heard. And I think that that's how we would understand environmental justice.
So building off of that a little bit, I know every community is built a little different, but we do have something that is known as an environmental justice or EJ score. What is an EJ score, and what does it mean, and how does it apply to the individual communities?
Oh, this can get a little bit technical, but let me see if I can bring it to the basics. So an environmental justice score is a metric that we use to assess the level of environmental injustices that experience a community. And the score can help us identify where are those communities, who are those communities. And this is very important because it can help us make better decisions, bring more resources to communities, and that's why it's very important. And here in Maryland, we have a great tool to get those scores, to find those scores, and this is, and you alluded to that during the presentation, the definitions of underserved and overburdened communities, right? An underserved community is based on socioeconomic and demographic data, and it's actually it's three factors, right? Low income, non-white populations, and also limited English proficiency. And that's an underserved community. For overburdened communities, there are 21 different factors, but we can group them in three different categories, right? One is burden exposure, which relates to human health. The other is environmental effects, which relates more to ecology. And the other is sensitive populations. There are things such as low birth weight, discharges from hospitals due to asthma and things of that nature. So that's how we determine overburden and underserved communities, and we can identify those EJ scores and what are those communities that are overburdened and underserved or with a higher EJ score. And again, this is very important because it can help us make better decisions. It can help us prevent some environmental injustices or mitigate environmental injustices, and also bring some resources to communities.
I can really appreciate like the depth of information we collect when creating an EJ score. And I know how much that helps in the decision-making process, but I'm actually very curious, the question for both of you, how will requiring or asking for an EJ analysis for certain permits change the way MDE makes decisions, particularly for communities with notably high EJ scores?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Ramon, I can go first if and then I know you'll hop in if I miss anything. So I think that gets at the heart of what the bill does, right? So and I put some links in the chat that I hope are helpful for folks, but the legislation that we're discussing today, HB 24 and SB 96, what it really does is there's two parts, and I know we're going to get to the second part a little bit later, but the first part that we're talking about is this process at MDE that through this bill, it would give MDE the authority to include an environmental justice analysis in the way it makes decisions about permitting. And so we talked about what is included. Right now, the MDE does not have the authority on certain kind of permits to make decisions based on environmental justice information, like solely on the basis of environmental justice information. And this would give them that authority. The way the bill is written, it addresses both new sources and renewals. So sort of existing. If an existing source of pollution asks for a renewal, MDE would then be able to modify, like place conditions on that permit. And the reason that's important is what we know in 2024 is different than what we knew in 2014 or in 2004. And the reason I'm giving that is because let's just say a permit is good for 10 years, but the lifetime of a facility is about 50 years, just for example. When that permit is issued, we learn more about impacts of pollution. We have new technologies to address pollution, and what's going on in that community where that facility is located might have changed since the permit was issued. There might be another facility. There might have been an increase in asthma rates. There might have been, other conditions that really, the economics of the neighborhood might have changed. And we know that everyone deserves equal protection under the law. And so it may be that, I think a mantra, we were talking about this on another bill yesterday, when we know better, we do better. And I think that's sort of what we can look at this bill. We're giving the opportunity to MDE to do better and include environmental justice analysis in the way it makes permits. And again, we're going to get into which kind of permits in a little bit. But that process piece is really what we're talking about, embedding environmental justice in the way that MDE makes its decisions for new permits, if you expand the way you're operating in a facility, or if you're just going on for a straight up renewal. It actually gives MDE the authority to make decisions for those kinds of permits.
Rebecca, thank you for that. You mentioned permits, but before we get to that, I actually have a follow-up question directly for Ramon. Ramon, what are you hearing from individuals on the ground in these affected communities regarding the environmental justice process and MDE's permitting process?
Thank you, Jason. So just to put in context, our CHISPA program has been working it was created about over 10 years ago. And for 10 years, we've been working with community members. It's a program where we we train, engage, and build the leadership of community members. And one of the issues, one of the problems that we hear constantly is air pollution, and is air pollution and the effects that air pollution has in human health, how kids are getting sick, asthma rates, the asthma rates among the families that we engage. And that is one of the main concerns that we hear over and over. It's a tragedy. It's not numbers. It's real people having an asthma attack, having to go to the hospital, having to miss the parents going to work because they have to go to the hospital, the bills and all of that. So I know that it is real problem. So air quality is one of the things that we are hearing. So regarding this bill, there's a couple of things that we have heard, right? One is the lack of community engagement. There hasn't been a robust community engagement in crafting this bill and putting this bill forward. So perhaps the priorities of the communities are not reflected here. And specifically, one of the things that we hear is, as I mentioned, it's air quality. We talk about overburdened communities, and most of the indicators that make an overburdened community that we use to identify overburdened communities are related to air quality. However, it is very limited the way the bill was written, how it would address air quality, those air permits, as Rebecca explained. So those are the things that we are hearing on the ground. So that's why it's very important to pay attention to those air quality and air quality permits, and how can we improve the conditions through this process.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the issue of air quality and how important it is for those on the ground, because that is exactly what this amendment we're advocating for this bill is about. The amendment specifically addresses air quality. This is a great question for me, being one step removed, who is still very much trying to understand air permits. So I'd love to know why the inclusion of air permits is important for addressing pollution. I know, Ramon, you've touched on that a bit, and I just want to learn more about that process and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason and Ramon. I think, you queued up the answer to this really well, which is you explained already why it's important to address air quality. And so how I'm going to answer this question is really why we are asking through an amendment. So our position on the bill is favorable with amendment. The process, the process piece is really important. And the amendment has to do with what that process applies to. The way the bill was introduced, and to be clear, I just want to be clear with folks, if you are familiar with the Maryland General Assembly website and you're looking at HB 24, the bill that you see on the website does not reflect a series of amendments that the bill sponsor is introducing. And so we're talking about a scope of the bill that's not reflective on the website. So the process piece hasn't caught up to where we are. The reprint is available. If you ask, reprint is a term for a version of the legislation that you can see the amendments incorporated. But the bill that's available on the Maryland General Assembly website does not reflect the amendments that were introduced during the hearing in the House, which happened last week. So just want to make that note. So what we're talking about is a little bit different than what you'll see on the website, but is reflective of what the bill looks like with the amendments introduced by the bill sponsor. And we're asking for an additional amendment that would include addressing air quality in the scope of this bill, the scope of this process. I'm going to use a jargony term, sorry, but the permits that are included in the bill are what are known as Section 1601A. What does that mean? What meaning does that have to you? I'm not, well, there's a lot of MDE folks, so it means something to them. But for folks tuning in who may not have ever heard of 1601A before, it's important to note that there was legislation that passed a few years ago that it's the category of permits that are subject to enhanced public participation. So that's what that category is. And in code, those types of permits are already required to have an EJ score submitted as part of that. So now this category of permits kind of gets included in a lot of environmental justice considerations. And what we're asking, because of community leadership is the 1601A category of permits the best way to address community concern? And what we're hearing is maybe not, because it only addresses air quality in a fairly narrow way, which is there is a type of permit in the 1601A category that addresses air pollution during the construction phase of a facility. And in that phase, you'll be able to set an emissions rate for the facility. So you'll be able to say, okay, I'm going to have extra emissions during the construction phase, which is expected. And then this is how much I'm going to emit for the lifetime of the facility. But that type of permit is not the air quality permit that gets renewed. There's a different category of permit that actually regulates the ongoing operations of a facility when it comes to air quality. And so to really get it addressing, we're asking for there to be an amendment to look at the ongoing air emissions from facilities. And those are what are known as Title V permits. But really the crux of it is when we're doing an EJ analysis on permits, to be responsive to community needs, we need to see that process applied to the ongoing emissions from air pollution from major facilities across the state.
We actually have a question in the chat that's very timely on this. It's about air quality. The question is, the number of EPA air quality monitors is very limited in some overburden areas. So how do we get better at monitoring so we know what folks are actually breathing?
Well, you want me to give it so indeed, and that's one of the things that we always say, right? This is a bill is just one of the avenues. It's one of the avenues to start addressing environmental injustice, but there are many other ways that we can take to address environmental justices, and that's one an important way. Making sure that communities understand the level of pollutions that are happening in their community through science, through monitoring. So that is a key piece. But it's also going above that, meeting the needs of the community. It's ensuring that, in communities there are green industry, that the industry that come to a community is for good paying jobs that stay with the community, that the wealth remains in the community. It's also about ensuring that that a community has access to healthy foods. So monitoring is very important, and it's an incredible tool that is going to, again, help us make better informed decisions and have a very robust public participation process. But it's one of the tools. We need to go farther above that. And the same way is the legislation that is already there, making sure that it's enforced equally. So all of that, there's a wide range of things that we can start implementing, start requesting, start asking for.
So a very likely hypothetical here, let's say because of the great work of the conservation community, those joining us on the webinar today as well, bill gets passed. What immediate actions can MDE begin to take, excuse me?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think the fun thing about laws is they pass and then they take additional elbow grease to implement, right? And so the first step that MDE would take is actually to define what an EJ analysis is. That is not actually defined in the legislation. That the legislation will put forth a rulemaking. So again, there's legislation and then there's regulation. And this is a law that's going to pass, and then it's up to the regulatory agencies to regulate and implement. So the way what would happen next is that MDE would initiate a rulemaking process to define what an EJ analysis is. And then once the EJ analysis is defined, they can start conducting the environmental justice analysis on permits that are applied for in census tracts that have that EJ score of 75 or above. That's the screening used in the bill. So the most overburdened and underserved communities in the state get this additional screening on permits. But that first step is a rulemaking for the agency to define what an EJ analysis is. And not to worry. We will engage all of you on the webinar today because there will be a public comment period. And we are going to have to be vocal about what should be included in an EJ analysis, because there will be those who are looking to have maybe lenient or a light EJ analysis, and we want to make sure that the the pillars of that EJ analysis are strong, and that the results of it would well inform MDE to make the decisions on permitting on additional pollution sources in communities.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I'm realizing we're slowly coming close on time here, but I actually want to get to this question I have. Beyond this bill, what other steps can we take on environmental justice in Maryland? And I imagine that's a long answer. I don't want to give both of you time to get to it. And I'll call on Ramon since I didn't specify who to go first. So Ramon.
What other step? But I mean, I started saying, there are many things. There's a number of things that we can do. And again, this is just the beginning. This is just one small piece of addressing environmental justice in Maryland. And one of the things that that we do in our CHISPA program with the Maryland LCV is work at the community level, really support communities, work with them to make sure they have the leadership, they have their space to advocate, they have the space to engage decision makers. So that's something that is very important for us. But again, that process, ensuring that community voices are heard, the community voices have that important space to address these issues is very important. And that's where I would start, and I highlight the importance of community participation. Solutions are from the community for the community. Often in times we believe we have a solution. We believe we know what is the right solution, but however, it is from communities for community. That is a way to address it.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that, we can always come back to, when we're talking about environmental justice, the two tenets of fair treatment and meaningful involvement. Those are the two federal sort of tenets that the definition of environmental justice rests on. And the 17 principles of environmental justice, which were promulgated in 1991 after the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in October of 91. So those are, more than 30 years old and really serve as the foundation of what we need to do today when we talk about environmental justice. And so what can we do in the state? Part of it through this bill is that small step in embedding the process in MDE's permitting. That's one, permitting is one way to address environmental justice, as Ramon already said. But another way is thinking about how we are allocating resources. So we know that there are communities who have faced systemic barriers to access power, access resources. And there are ways now that we can make sure we are overcorrecting the system to make sure that people who have been disinvested for decades, say centuries, now are getting the infusion of resources that they have been denied. And so one way to do that is through the implementation of the Justice 40 initiative. And when we talk about climate funding, when we talk about infrastructure funding, we're targeting that influx of resources, again, in those communities who have been systematically excluded from access to resources. That's another way we can get at addressing environmental justice.
Thank you both for that detailed answer. I actually think this dovetails really great into a question that we often get in our Friday Digest. And a way to close this out is, speaking of resources, how can people get involved? We get that question very frequently. Following our webinar today, we'll be sending out an action alert on this issue. I'm just going to quickly share my screen to show you this process, so just to show what you need to do. So when you click on our action alert, you'll be sent to a page like this. All you will need to do is fill out your contact information, and you are also allowed to customize your message if you'd like to the elected official. This is very important, and it actually makes a huge difference. Our legislators want to hear from you, and your voice can definitely make a difference. So if you ever see our action alert and it's something you want to take action on, highly recommend to do it. We'll be sending that out later today. But with that, I think we're actually at time, right on the dot, which is fabulous. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As I wrap up, I want to thank Rebecca and Ramon for joining as well and for all of your insight. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for an email about our next Friday Digest. We really do hope you can join us next week. And also in the chat, you'll be seeing a 5-question survey, which you can fill out. We'll also send that an email as well. And again, these really help inform the topics we choose for our Friday Digests. With that, happy Friday, everybody. Thank you so much and enjoy the weekend.